got to the middle of, but at that time we sued our directors and officers insurance. See some among other things.
This was the National Mortgage Equity. I was we represented the lawyer.
Oh, at Mark Bessel, that's right.
I like the deposition in that case where they needed.
Just to finish this, the point is that, so now there's an exclusion for policies. For that. One and only time. Unfortunately, probably not much people know. Otherwise, the taxpayers anyway, yes. So
In the depot, this question is
Mike.
pay off. Listen, Mike, they had to pay off the escrow guys. Approve the transaction. I would be proposed.
No, actually, I haven't seen it. Let me jump back. I haven't seen it.
I don't know, but
Yes, no, we're on August 4th. I haven't heard from them, but I will.
there was another piece
I
from
have not heard.
Charles.
But I will reach out to them.
For the banks.
It's definitely going to be this month, so it would be in person at least.
So it's actually where I met my wife.
So, no, I haven't received it. I think one reminder tonight is definitely going to remind people to check in a couple times into their city emails. Yes. Everything is sent from the city clerk's office is sent to there. Yeah, David does forward like oaths and things like that, and so he'll say, "Hey, these need to be signed by new members. These are new members. These members have been voted in by city council." But so I hear that from the city clerk's office, but I don't hear. I haven't heard anything about the tree. Chair and vice chair.
Sugar, as I said that.
What are we going to do?
Hadn't represented the firm, and then they conflict of the representative. My uncle was his cousin.
Yeah. Very first thing. No. Well, my wife and I were convinced that the date wasn't the particular deposition where we met. Let that in our lottery tickets. But then that wasn't the date of the deposition. Yeah. Well, that was good training then for the financial. Yes. 17 years.
Anyway, it turned out
I can edit it so it's clear, but I just want to touch.
for people concerned.
General attention. I mean, if you go on there's a lot of new something to put in there.
I think for future references and updated. I said for future meetings, an update of the dollars would be of interest.
I can see, I don't know if they do it monthly, so I can see.
How?
Yeah, how often they do it. I know we
I'm just
Yes, please.
Something like March 1st.
Calendar year starts March.
I'm just observing. I've applied to the
Well,
oversight committee, and so I wanted to
They do
understand
quarterly
what you guys
business
are saying.
tax, just like
Oh, what
regular
department?
city.
I'm in housing and services.
I got it.
Administration.
Oh, no, housing, we update our
Pretty
housing
new,
trust
so I'm still
fund.
learning the ropes on it.
So,
And I
every
respect
year,
So this is the second meeting with this group.
we update our
We've had
numbers.
one
I know check finance, so are they doing it that often, or
But the
are they
thing
doing it?
is,
And so,
As
Basically,
often as they do it,
we should keep it live.
I don't know whether there was actually.
oh, thank you. This is my first time doing this, so it's like this on top of the parking garage.
Is it first
parking
time?
garage?
I put my
Is
bike
it-
down.
Oh, you did, okay.
That was in June?
Right, so that's March, April, May.
Yeah, so it's 3 months. So I'll just check with finance and see how.
Find out about June and July.
Directly to the center. Because I did talk about that when I introduced myself. And I think following up on that is just, he's just one of the, I don't know if
It's like,
the
realize,
city directly gives him
I
money
don't remember how that
or
changed.
not.
Sure.
People just sort of-
When I outside needed, I
Is
just.
that a city program or a town? Shelter, okay, so, yeah, any shelter is a city program. I thought the shelters and housing for the city and the county must take care of services around housing. These are all interesting things that we should have an idea about, right? And I hope we're. Or three of us, you can tell. We'll talk about it. But, tell me if I'm speaking out of turn, perhaps after maybe.
Not too bad. Checking the minutes here.
Getting a summer in?
Uh,
So I mean, no trips anymore.
My daughter was in this weekend. Found her wedding dress that she's had.
Excited. When is that?
Next.
Next night.
Isn't it?
It's a whole different deal these days. Started planning their weddings in quick.
That's really funny. Is that true?
Start planning.
Their wedding before they had formally engaged. It's the whole. For us, it's pretty simple. We told them, here's how much money you can have. You can spend it on your wedding. If you want it for something else, you want to do it. I mean, more than this buys, you have to pay for it.
That's good. That's a good idea.
Yes.
Yes. That's what the East Coast.
Okay, well, to order the meeting of the GS Citizens Oversight Committee. We have a roll call.
Member Buchanan. Member Jiva Prakash. Here. Member Kelley.
Here.
Member Wessel.
Here.
Vice Chair Anderson.
Here.
Chair Solo.
Here. Okay, our first item is public input on things that aren't on the agenda. We do have somebody in the audience. Do you have any comment?
I don't actually have comment. I would just like to introduce myself. I'm Sam Shapiro Applied. I'm a housing advocate locally, and I applied to join the GS committee. So I'm here to listen as well. And nice to meet you all.
Welcome, nice to meet you. Okay, that completes item 1. Item 2, public input about the items on the agenda. No public comment. Move to item 3. Special agenda items. A is discussion from the subcommittee on flexible finance assistance program. I guess that's our informal subcommittee since we didn't have it agendized to appoint them formally. So the members of that committee, is there anything you wish to raise with the commission as all, the committee as all?
I think we should report on our conversations just so that other members can know what we talked about, and maybe there are some ideas for next steps that came out of it. We talked with Richard Diaz, who's the senior administrative analyst, and Nicholas Sunback, who's a policy performance analyst. And so of the first year, there was 28 million came in, 10 million went to the school, so there was 18 left. And the 18, 8 of it was allocated, 2 million to right to counsel and 6 million to flexible financial assistance. That doesn't mean it's been spent, but it's just the bucket that they put it in to try and meet the outlines of the measure. So on right to counsel, the city, before all this happened, before GS happened, had done a deal with the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles to provide counsel for tenants that were being evicted. They explained that that original deal was done by the city attorney's office, but then oversight for it transferred to housing.
No, at the time, it was Human Services Division, but the HPI team, which is now the town division. And it was done as a pilot.
And so now it's under homeless.
Homeless prevention and intervention division, or also shortened, which is easier, HPI division.
So the idea would be to think about spending more of that money to either expand that program or to find other legal service providers who could provide services in addition to that. So I thought one thing potentially for us to put on the agenda at some point would be to talk to some of the legal services lawyers who work on this, just to give us their view on the kinds of challenges that people face, so that we understand, when you set up a right counsel program to right counsel people, what are we counseling them on, and how much of that involves people not paying the rent, where GS money could maybe bridge the gap. We even talked on one of the calls whether if you had a program, financial assistance program, whether there could be some kind of requirement that when you did a notice to quit, when somebody had to leave because they hadn't paid their rent, that there would be an attachment that says, but there's a program in Santa Monica you can apply to get the rent paid. So they would learn about it when their landlord was telling them they had to leave. So that's one piece of it. They're looking to expand it. I think that was what they said. I don't think they were far along in actually expanding. That's their plan on how that money would be spent on council. On the flexible financial assistance, they indicated that they thought it was hard for the city to manage the money if someone said, met the criteria under some program and said they need $3,000 for back rent, or I'm going to be evicted, it would be hard for the city to cut those kinds of checks idea was to do an RFP to see if they could find vendors that would administer a flexible financial assistance program when one was put in place. So that's really where they were at the time of the goal. So the money's been allocated but not spent. I think money either has been spent or companies been not hiring new people to help us.
That was separate, yeah, so, what was committed to council was that these programs would take 12 to 18 months to fully roll out. The rights, some additional updates in the subcommittee we met, that right to council program is going to be administered by the HPI division. So we're moving forward with expanding it with LAFLA and seeing what their capacity is, but we also had discussed, I think in the news, we had talked about the capacity for attorneys and the concern of, we've been hearing from across the board is that there's not enough attorneys, and that's the biggest challenge, is actually staffing up attorneys. So we're having those, continuing those discussions to see what that format will look like, being able to fully staff up, while also meeting the needs for those that are undocumented as they can be assisted by LAFLA. There's other services like BASTA Inc., who currently is being used right now by LAFLA for those that they can serve. And the other updates, the FFA program or the Flexible Finance Assistance Program, that will be administered once housing gets RFP up and running by the Human Services Division, as they have experience overseeing contracts that administer these funds or similar types of programs like this. So they'll be administering that program.
Do they do the vouchers?
The housing division is the vouchers. But they were the ones, Human Services Division is the ones who did the COVID era flex funding, I'm blanking on the name right now. They oversaw that program in partnership with the housing division. And they're also rolling out a program, they do the Human Services Grant Program, which is very similar, where the city provides money and they do a whole host of other programs.
Are these all under your housing authority?
No, so Human Services Division and the HPI Division are the other divisions as part of the Housing and Human Services Division. And I oversee the Housing Division, which includes the Housing Authority, production, preservation of affordable housing, and also the compliance of our inclusionary ordinance.
So a couple of observations.
Just one other update. So we asked about on the data on the notices to quit, that when people do a notice to quit, says you have to move out of your apartment, they're supposed to send it to the city attorney's office. So the city attorney's office has a record of it. And if they file an unlawful detainer action, they're supposed to send it to the city attorney's office. So they cited to this report that basically says, I think it's underreported on this. And so this, I think, has some estimates about how many unlawful detainer actions there are and how many notices to quit there are. They said non-reporting is an issue, but sometimes it's an issue because someone will get a notice to quit and they'll either leave or they'll pay and they'll go away. So the landlords just don't always file. And I don't know whether that's something where there could be more compliance or whether people would be encouraged to do it because they know there's programs available to get rent. And I think Renee had mentioned during the call from months or years before that sometimes when landlords, it's a good idea to figure out ways to let landlords know about programs. I think you said there was like, we did an event once.
We did, that's been quite a while. Did it, when I was still working. We invited all the
So we discussed that there were other ways for the city to increase notice to landlords about available programs and programs. Now, I thought that Richard was very knowledgeable. I don't know which department he's in.
He's in housing.
But is it his job, it seemed like his job was to oversee some of this.
He was responsible for overseeing the study that was done and taking it to council, and he's currently looking to oversee the development of the RFP that will be used for the flexible assistance programs.
Because I thought he was someone who would be worth inviting to talk to us directly. Because of his
Number one, I agree with you. As the ramp up of knowledge, having both somebody from legal aid speak as well as the city is important. We've had, and there have been discussions about this issue for the last decade in the city, and some of the best people at legal aid now work in the city attorney's office. Great hires that help enormously with the city's enforcement and the like, but I'm not sure who has been able to step in their place. That's an issue. I think recruiting probably is a challenge because there was already increased money for eviction defense attorneys and tenant attorneys, even before Measure ULA and Measure GS. Measure ULA has a certain portion of its money that's supposed to go to legal defense, and there are only so many people who wish to do this work. So I would like to hear whether we face a problem similar to the one that we hear with recruitment of police officers, which is everybody now is recruiting in the same space, which makes it difficult. So that's observation one. I think it is good background information. Observation two is that I think it's important that we understand what the financing was that was in place for these other programs before this came in. Because one thing that is very clear in Measure GS is this is meant to be additive, not replacement. So I would like to be certain that I know how much the city is spending already on these programs, and that the money that's being devoted here is on top of the continuation of that money. If not, that's a real issue that needs to be brought to the attention of the city council about what the meaning of GS is. Number three, that's interesting. I did not realize that there's a requirement to provide copies of the notice to quit to the city, but you're absolutely right. It's a little better now. I think it's 5 days notice, but the bill that was in the legislature to increase it to 14 days notice, which would allow some greater effort once notice to quit occurred to try and solve the situation before lawsuit begins to pick the tenant failed. There was massive lobbying about the Apartment Owners Association in California, and so that did not pass. And the reality is that 5 days is better than 3, but that's very little time, particularly if tenants, they're not going to self-navigate this. They're going to have to get to somebody who's going to help them. So the reality is that for intervention to be truly effective, to be most effective, it has to happen before the notice to quit occurs. And we need to figure out ways to do that. One of the things that we need to have lawyers for is for people to come to when they have landlord-tenant problems before they get the notice to quit, so that they can hopefully start intervening with the landlords and the like. And we may, when we have this meeting, we'll invite these folks. Actually, I think we probably ought to consider inviting Denise McGranahan and Roman Gomshaw from the city attorney's office, who were both legal aid, tenant side lawyers for a long time before they joined the city. And we'll do it because absolutely right about that, you know, there's a shorter time. And the problem is that once the time runs and the lawsuit is filed, you no longer have a right to cure. And the landlords, it's rent control unit, you no longer have the right to cure. So if you get, I think it's now a 5-day notice, if you get the notice and those 5 days run, that's it. Now the landlord can evict you for the non-payment of rent unless you have some other defense. And you can't just say, sorry, here's the money. That doesn't solve the problem that way. You can only pay the money to make the problem go away before that deadline runs. And the problem is that in a rent control jurisdiction like ours, there's generally an incentive for landlords to get rid of existing tenants because they get to then reset the rent to market every time they do that. So they don't have an incentive to, you know, take the money after that, which is very different than if you were in a non-rent control jurisdiction where it might be to the landlord's advantage to keep the tenant even if they blew it in one case. So I think critical problem, and I'm not sure if anybody's yet come up with a great solution for it, is how do we intervene ahead of time? Now, part of the purpose of having things like Section 8 vouchers or a pod program or whatever is to intervene long before that happens by making sure people have enough money to pay the rent for people who are going to be struggling to do that. Whether there's what we can do for more emergency, one-off kind of rent to intervene early, I'm not sure what the answer is, and I think that that's a really crucial question. And so I like everything you're doing. I think you're on the right answers, and I think it would be very helpful to get some of these folks in to talk about what they've seen and whether they have any ideas, and we ought to talk to the people at the they're still calling it Keep LA House. There was an issue. State House, LA, thank you. Those folks about whether they've figured out how to solve this problem either.
I guess I'm wondering to what extent, like, kind of following on what Mike was saying, and was running into from the conversation with staff, like, to what extent is the right to counsel piece also like an outreach and education piece? Is it really just legal counsel once there's an issue, or is part of the program to be out kind of educating renters about what their rights are? Because I feel like the State House LA program, a lot of it is about education.
So is it okay if I answer, or?
I don't think we've talked about the specifics about what the components are, but
Other than the issue.
yeah, I think the implementation is still not.
Yeah.
I would assume that would be included.
That's
Yeah.
why I thought talking to the people who've actually been doing the contract to say how we can find you, what ways could we help you find compliance, we know they're there.
The other thing I wanted to ask about on the rental assistance component, and so do you know what the timing is for the RFP?
So we've been told by procurement the lead time. We can speed it up, but hopefully before the end of the year we can get it out. The goal is 18 months from now to get the council to have
Request for proposal, so to find a vendor to help them manage the rental assistance program. And will the RFP be about just implementing the program, or will the vendor also be defining the shape of the program, or is it staff defining the shape of the program and then finding the vendor?
Will be both. It will also include the possibility for a vulnerability index, which is part of the recommendations of the council as well. So it will include both of those. And then we also, part of the flexible finance funding is also for the right to counsel council, a portion of it is for settling cases, helping them rent those other businesses.
Are these all below market housing rents groups?
No, I think as noted, that your criteria for income levels to meet the criteria to either get right to counsel or when they set up the flexible financial assistance to get that. The city of LA had that, I forget what the numbers were.
Do we know how many people in Santa Monica have been evicted through this recently? I mean, do we?
No, that's why I asked that question, especially because of the requirement that the city attorney find out about it. But I'll find in here where they discuss it. They tried to figure this report, they tried to answer that question. But, and they,
How much of that money was spent on lawyers and how much?
I don't think any of it's actually been spent. I think
It's just proposed.
it's just sitting there so that this 12 to 18 month timeline, that when the council did it, was in March.
It was in March.
So the council in March said, set this up and get it running, up and running in the next 12 days.
So up to now,
There's an existing legal aid program that's been for a decade.
right, so that's been going on and people have been evicted and they go to council to help them get out of the situation.
They've been sued for eviction. Sometimes they're a victim, sometimes they're not. But there's generally been a view that we need more lawyers. There's research that's been done. You know, self-help is basically worthless, to be perfectly honest.
What's that? What's up?
Where you try and give people the tools to represent themselves and that kind of stuff. But basically, the only thing that makes a material difference to keeping people either housed or if they can't stay housed in this particular thing, you can put in a position where they have a fair shot at getting new housing. So if you actually have an eviction and that's public, that makes it extremely difficult to get replacement housing. So sometimes what people get in those cases, the result is not that you're going to prevail, but it's that they get a certain number of months before they have to leave, which gives them some time to look around. They seal the record so that it's not sort of like a juvenile offender records, sealed so that you can get a job, same kinds of things. So there are a number of different kinds of outcomes, but they all, to be successful, depend on lawyers, and quite frankly, to connect the people. One of the roles of the lawyer would be connecting people to the city funding, although that could be something.
So the
Necessarily.
lawyers have to be private, or could they be a department within the city that would be funded by this?
Well, we're affected. The legal services organizations, this is what they do. And so we pay for them to have some additional staff that works for that, but it makes more sense for the people who've already been doing this for a living and professional. As my pro bono work, I do certain things for free. I work in the landlord-tenant space on certain things, but my experience is that for sort of day-to-day or routine kinds of problems, having people with experience is the most effective way.
And the city can't do anything to change any of these rules that are in place, the 5-day rule or anything?
No, that's state law. It preempts local law.
Yeah.
So there have been efforts in the past by local jurisdictions to try to change the length of notice and things like that. The courts have said, you can't do that, that's only the state.
So in this
fancy word for eviction, actually, in California.
They, I guess they check a box, and it's in a container, and they have to have the address and say the zip code, so these people where to go and find out how many of them there were in Santa Monica in this particular time frame. And so they discussed what they found from that study, and then they compared that to ones that were actually filed with the city attorney's office.
Oh, interesting.
It's a small one.
How much smaller?
Just curious. So there were, in the window that they looked at, there were 236 actions filed. And then so there were 66 filed with the city attorney's office for 2023. They estimated that there were basically 500 cases a year. The 236 number was an actual number, it wasn't a full year, so then they generalized it for the year. So 66 were filed with the city attorney's office, of which 76% were non-payment.
76% were,
Non-payment rent, meaning that's the big issue. And then they reached a conclusion here that that of those people who didn't have a rent issue, that 70% they just need help, one-time help to deal with rent. And 30% might need more long-term help. But it's consistent with what the GS measure said, that there are people who are on the edge, but might need emergency assistance because of some event. Losing a job or something like that, but only temporarily. So, and the numbers are small, relative to the amount of money GS is provided is large. I'm not making those.
so what's the time frame in getting something up and going?
That's what the direction
They're
of
working on.
council is 12 to 18 months. But maybe on our subcommittee would try and study these pages 9 to 13 and see if we get some updates on it. Our audience has a question.
Hang on a second. So, one other thing, it'd be interesting to see what the cost is of having somebody administer the money to do it quickly. Because the other alternative is to have a revolving fund that does get dispersed and some few mistakes get made. We can absorb that, but we ought to, I just want to know before we do that, how much money we're spending.
And
someone
also
to
the-
administer.
They did it with the ULA, they actually did it. So, it must be doable, they did.
Well, they're certainly right. So, I think I can say this. So I actually have, as a lawyer, experience representing a client in Santa Monica dealing with the city on the issue of financial assistance to resolve the matter. And people, I was told then, right, they're just not super nimble, and one of the problems is that it can be something that can be very time sensitive to do that. So I think as a practical matter, from my experience in this space, and we should hear from the people who actually doing it. I think the city is right to be looking for a way to be able to disperse the money much faster than our normal financial process works. But that being said, the question is how much does it cost to have somebody else do that versus ourselves? It may very well be that it's cost effective, but that is our one mandate, one written criteria that we have to consider with everything. It's cost effective, so we're curious to find out what it would cost to do that. Because the other thing is to have a pile of money that people can disperse quickly. It turns out, it's not meeting the criteria. We can absorb that loss, but it would keep getting filled with it. there are two issues. I mean, there's one issue is this the right person to be spending the money on? And the other is, if it is, how fast do we actually get the money to them? These are two separate questions. The first one does have to be answered in any case, because we only have so much money. So, for example, the existing program, things that they're looking at is this really the same as person's tendency? Right? Because if not, then unless we can get them into the ongoing support program, there's no point in paying the money just to put off eviction for a month or two. That's just not a cost-effective use of government funds. And then it's how much people get, et cetera, et cetera. Is there anybody else on the committee who wants to say anything? If not, then,
Can I just clarify, just in terms of the GS funds? Right, was this supposedly the 2020, like, is there alignment between?
It's just the first year. The first year of the
income assistance?
The income assistance and the tenant declaration that we also received, which is not Measure GS funding, $1 million from the state of California for the Pro Housing Incentive Program, which we were eligible for receiving. We are Pro Student Housing. We received certification for our housing. So that was $1 million that we have specifically for emergency assistance, not the right to council, but for the emergency assistance.
So 5.4 and 2.5 million of the 29 million that's been collected as of the date of this table has been allocated.
Correct. And then just to confirm, the right to counsel program, that was the pilot program that this is expanding on that. And the flexible financial assistance program, that is a new program. Currently, all that is available is for our human services grant providers. We have a small bucket of one-time funding that is utilized from time to time. But it's very, very small and not this wide scale.
okay. So I think unless there's an objection from the committee, our audience member comment on this agenda supplements. Go ahead.
Thank you for calling on me after this sort of technical, but it was small. My question was about whether we have any insight into barriers for the city to directly implement the FFA grants, and why it's been challenging for the city to disperse the money quickly enough, whether it's because of vetting or financial technology, we have any insight into why it's a bubble.
You mean the existing programs?
So if there was $6 million available for the financial assistance, direct payments to tenants or landlords, we've discussed that the city had begun an RFP to have an outside vendor implement that program. So my question is, has there been any consideration of the city directly dispersing funds? There was a comment about it, the city couldn't do it fast enough. And so my question is, do we have any insight into why that's the case? The city cannot disperse money directly fast enough.
I don't
My
know
guess
that we
is
do,
that, my
but
guess
I
is that they
think
have a lot
that's-
of control procedures, right? And those control procedures are just not going to be fast enough to step in as like.
That's also why I thought, and between now and then, meeting, I'll try and research this, because the city of LA did it last year with ULA money, they actually figured out a way to do it. And so they gave out 4,000 checks, and so it'd be good to find out how they did it.
We also have to find out whether they actually, how fast they distribute it relative to when people apply, to know whether it's any different. So we want to find that out as well. But I think just more generally, things we talked about at our first meeting was that most of the members of the commission and committee don't have a background in any existing programs that the city has, so we're going to be going through, laid out a whole bunch of different programs that the city has. This is among them. I don't believe we're covering those today, but when the people come in from the existing programs, we certainly can and should be asking what they're prepared for. Okay. Is there anything else on item 3A?
Is that, can I ask about this again?
I already got it.
So this, a certain amount's already been allocated and we don't have any say over it, or, and we don't need to vote on any of that.
So I think this chart just simply tells us in the 23-24 period was an extra 18 million after they gave 10 million to the schools.
Mm-hmm.
And if you apply these percentages, this is how much is in each bucket. There was no judgment made about how much should be spent on each. This is just to let us know if you apply the percentages that are in the ordinance,
Mhm.
that's about the numbers that are there.
Okay.
And then in March, the council said, okay, start to spend the money, figure out a way to spend the money from year one over the next 12 to 18 months. Some on right to council, some on flexible financial assistance. And our report was that the city's basically just starting that process, the staff is. And then the person we talked to who seemed most knowledgeable about where they were was Richard Diaz. And so I thought maybe he could come to this committee and then he can answer a lot of the questions that we might have about what's the status.
So the other numbers further down, we're not even looking at right now.
The council didn't make a direction on the year two money. So in year two, which was 24-25, there was an extra 10 million. And they're still not they haven't spent the year one money. So they're not addressing year two. But now we're in year three, and we got the report at the last meeting that in year three, they raised the 10 million in the first 3 months and set that aside for the schools, and there was 1 million extra. But presumably in the last 2 months, more money's come in, so that number in the 25-26 column is going to grow.
But we're not even going to concern ourselves with that right now. Just
Well,
the first year.
So I think it's, here's how I put it. So the city council, but ultimately all we are is an advisor. Right? We have no power to do anything. Okay? So all we can do is make recommendations to the city council, and they make the decisions. Okay? So let's start with that. Before we reformed, they already went ahead and made recommendations based on this study and the like. I think in the staff report that went with it. I think realistically, unless there was something truly shocking, the city council wasn't planning to make this a one-year program. This is going to be an ongoing program. So they have probably realistically committed to this going on. So where do we have the role to play? One place is they are just forming